A woman named Anna Pasternak describes the moment she first laid eyes on her future mother-in-law as, quote, a poisonous burst of hatred. Not mild discomfort, not awkward small talk. Hatred, instant, mutual, and apparently completely justified. Today, we're getting into what actually makes an in-law a real-life monster. Not just annoying, not just different, but genuinely damaging. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to tell the difference between normal in-law friction and something that's actually toxic. Understand the deep psychological and even biological roots of why these relationships go sideways, and walk away with real strategies for protecting yourself and your relationship. Joining me to dig into all of this is someone who's done a deep dive into the research, so let's get into it. What are we actually talking about when we say monster-in-law?
So the term has become this massive cultural shorthand, right? There's the 2005 movie. There are entire TikTok and Instagram accounts dedicated to cataloging every in-law misstep as evidence of toxicity. But what the research actually shows is that a genuinely toxic in-law relationship is something very specific. It's a sustained pattern of control, criticism, and boundary violation. Not a bad holiday dinner, not an unsolicited opinion about your cooking, a pattern.
Okay, so there's a real distinction being drawn here between, like, annoying and actually harmful.
Exactly. And that distinction matters enormously. According to NeuroLaunch, a toxic mother-in-law shows control disguised as advice, criticism disguised as concern, and boundary violations disguised as closeness. The key word is disguised. Each individual incident can feel minor. She showed up unannounced. She bought the kids gifts that override your parenting decisions. She made a comment about your job. But it's the repetition that makes it toxic.
And that repetition is what makes it so hard to name, right? Because in the moment, each thing feels like you're overreacting.
That's exactly the trap. And the passive-aggressive layer makes it even harder. NeuroLaunch describes it perfectly. Fine doesn't mean fine. Do whatever you want is not permission. And then when direct confrontation fails, guilt steps in. Lines like, after everything I've done for you, are designed to make you feel responsible for her feelings.
Ugh, that's so recognizable. And it's not just uncomfortable, there are actual health consequences here, right?
Long-term exposure to this kind of stress is linked to anxiety, depression, and lower relationship satisfaction for the person on the receiving end. That's not just anecdotal, that's what the research on toxic in-law dynamics consistently shows.
So this is genuinely a health issue, not just a family drama issue.
Right. And here's where it gets interesting from a cultural standpoint. The term monster-in-law has been around forever, but social media has turbocharged it. Psychology Today's Dr. Sylvia McCookie-Enyart points out that TikTok and Instagram accounts now characterize every misstep, every well-intentioned offer of help as a toxic trait requiring harsh words and strong boundaries. And that framing, she argues, is doing real damage to how people enter these relationships in the first place.
Wait, so the way we talk about toxic in-laws online might actually be creating more conflict?
That's her argument. She uses this metaphor of glasses. If you put on dark, warped lenses before you even meet your in-laws, everything they do gets filtered through that distortion. You're primed to see hostility even when it isn't there. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's a genuinely uncomfortable point because I think a lot of people, myself included, would push back on that. Like, isn't it better to be prepared?
And that's a fair pushback. The nuance is that Dr. McCookie-Enyart isn't saying bad in-laws don't exist. She's very clear that they do. She's saying the data doesn't support the idea that most in-laws are toxic. In fact, she says she's been surprised in her own studies at the high levels of satisfaction that parents and children-in-law actually report.
Okay, so most in-law relationships are actually fine, but when they're not fine, they can be really not fine.
Exactly. And the ones that are genuinely not fine, those are worth taking seriously. According to Psychology Today's Tasha Seiger, a licensed marriage and family therapist, 75% of couples report having problems with an in-law at some point. So friction is nearly universal. But there's a big gap between friction and toxicity.
75%. That's basically everyone.
It really is. And what makes in-law conflict so uniquely painful is that it creates this loyalty tension at the center of your relationship. When someone feels like their partner always sides with their parents, it can feel like you're competing for loyalty. And when you're the one caught in the middle, no matter what you do, someone ends up disappointed.
That middle position sounds exhausting. And I think that's where Anna Pasternak's story really lands. She wrote about convincing herself that because she and her mother-in-law both loved the same man, love would conquer their differences. And it just didn't.
And she's not alone in that delusion. Her words, not mine. She describes it as addled naivety, this idea that you marry the man, not his mother. But as she puts it, the two are so entwined that a power struggle between the two women in his life is, sadly, often inevitable.
And that power struggle has a name, right? There's actual research on this.
Dr. Terry Apter, a Cambridge psychologist, has studied this extensively. Her research found that nearly 2/3 of daughters-in-law accuse their husband's mother of what she calls unreasonably jealous maternal love. And her explanation is that both women are competing to establish themselves as the primary woman in the family hierarchy. As she puts it, each tries to establish or protect their status, each feels threatened by the other.
So it's not just personality clashes, it's structural.
It's structural, and it may even be biological. A 2021 study cited by Integrity Press found that mother-in-law conflicts often stem from evolutionary competition, specifically over resources and child-rearing approaches. The tension between wives and mothers-in-law actually occurs with greater frequency than tension between daughters and their own biological mothers, which is wild when you think about it.
Wait, so you're more likely to clash with your mother-in-law than with your own mom?
According to that research, yes. And the evolutionary framing suggests it's because the stakes are higher. You're both invested in the same person, the same children, the same household resources. It's not just about feelings. It's about territory in a very primal sense.
That reframes the whole thing. It's not that your mother-in-law is a bad person necessarily. It's that the relationship itself is set up with competing interests baked in.
And there's actually a term for this in the academic literature. Research published in the journal Social Work Review by Jeffrey Greif and Michael Woolley found that in-law relationships carry what they call structural ambiguity, a kind of built-in role confusion that other family bonds don't have. And that ambiguity alone makes normal disagreements more likely to be read as hostile.
So the relationship is almost preloaded for misinterpretation.
Exactly. You don't have decades of shared history to draw on. You don't have the same communication shorthand. And unlike a friendship, you can't just quietly exit when things get hard. You're bound together through someone you both love. And
that's where the psychological drivers come in, right? Because it's not just the structure. There are specific things happening inside the mother-in-law that fuel the behavior.
Right. Neurolaunch breaks down the common psychological drivers as insecurity about losing relevance, unresolved attachment wounds from their own family of origin, and in some cases, personality traits like narcissism. And Tech Buzzer adds another layer, identity and role conflict. For many mothers-in-law, their identity is deeply tied to their role as a parent. When a new partner enters the picture, it can trigger feelings of jealousy and possessiveness that manifest as controlling behavior.
So she's not necessarily trying to be a monster. She's scared of becoming irrelevant.
In many cases, yes. And understanding which driver you're dealing with actually changes how you respond. Insecurity looks different from narcissism. Unresolved attachment wounds look different from a communication style clash. The approach that works for one won't necessarily work for the other.
Okay, let's talk about the partner in all of this, because I think that's where a lot of the real damage happens. Like, the in-law is one thing, but what about the person who's caught in the middle?
This is so important. Tasha Sitcher, the couples therapist from Psychology Today, describes a pattern she sees constantly in her practice. She calls it the "that's not what she meant" dance. One partner is hurt by something the in-law did or said. The other partner, trying to preserve family harmony, immediately invalidates the hurt. "She didn't mean it like that. You're making too big a deal of this."
And that invalidation is its own wound on top of the original one.
Exactly. Sitcher says that feeling understood is among the most important needs we have as humans. When your partner tells you there's nothing to worry about, you don't feel soothed. You feel unseen. And over time, that erodes the relationship from the inside.
So the in-law conflict becomes a couple conflict.
Almost inevitably. Laurel Therapy puts it really well. In-law conflict isn't just about personality differences. It creates a deeper tension between your spouse's past and your shared present. And when someone feels like their partner always sides with their parents, it can feel like you're competing for loyalty in your own marriage.
And I think there's also this social pressure layer, like you're supposed to just tolerate it, keep the peace. They mean well. That's just how they are.
That's a really important point. Laurel Therapy addresses this directly. Keeping the peace often means one person quietly absorbing behavior that doesn't feel okay. And over time, that damages not only your well-being, but the relationship itself. The peace you're keeping is actually a slow leak.
A slow leak? That's such a good way to put it. So what do you actually do? Because I think people get to this point and they feel completely stuck.
So the research and the therapist are pretty aligned on a few things. First, boundaries, but not just setting them, consistently enforcing them. Neurolaunch is very clear that clear, consistently enforced boundaries change these dynamics more reliably than confrontation or avoidance. It's not about the dramatic conversation, it's about the follow-through.
So it's less about the big blow-up and more about the steady, boring consistency.
Exactly. And the second piece is how you communicate as a couple. Integrity Press cites marriage experts who recommend communicating decisions as a unified couple rather than deflecting responsibility. So instead of, my partner won't let me, it's, we've decided. That removes the in-laws' ability to drive a wedge between you.
The united front. That makes sense. What about in the moment when you're actually face-to-face with the behavior?
Marriage and family therapist Sarah M. Klein has a really interesting approach. She calls it the anthropologist's mindset. Observe and describe situations objectively without rushing to judgment. Create emotional distance so you don't react in ways that escalate things permanently. It's not about suppressing your feelings, it's about buying yourself time to respond instead of react.
I like that. You're basically treating the situation like a field study rather than a personal attack.
And for the partner who's caught in the middle, the single most important thing, according to Seicher, is to validate your partner's feelings. Don't try to talk them out of it. Don't explain away the in-laws' behavior. Just acknowledge that what they experienced was real and that it hurt. That alone changes the dynamic between the two of you.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's incredibly hard in practice, especially when you love both people.
It is hard, because validating your partner doesn't mean attacking your parent. You can say, I hear that hurt you without saying, my mom is a monster. Those are two completely different conversations, and keeping them separate is what protects both relationships.
And I think that's actually the counterintuitive thing here. The goal isn't to win against the in-law, it's to protect the marriage.
That's exactly it. Laurel therapy frames it this way. The goal of setting boundaries with difficult in-laws is not to control them or get them to suddenly become emotionally mature. The goal is to create a healthier, more sustainable way for you to participate in the relationship. You're not trying to fix them, you're trying to protect yourself.
And sometimes that means professional help, right? Like this isn't always something you can navigate on your own.
Absolutely. Integrity Press is clear that professional therapy and counseling can provide personalized strategies for managing toxic in-law relationships while preserving marital health. And the Gottman method, which several of the therapists cited in the research use, is specifically grounded in decades of research on what makes relationships thrive under exactly this kind of pressure.
Let me push back on one thing though, because we've been talking a lot about what the person dealing with the difficult in-law should do. But what about the in-law's perspective? Is there any research on that side of it?
There is, and it's actually really humanizing. Research cited by mindidealcoaching.com, drawing on Dr. Terry Apter's work, found that over 60% of women experience sustained stress with their mothers-in-law or daughters-in-law. So the stress runs in both directions. The mother-in-law is often also struggling. She's watching her son build a life with someone else, watching family traditions shift, feeling her role shrink.
So she's grieving something too.
In a real sense, yes. And Dr. Brené Brown's research, cited in that same piece, shows that when we judge others harshly, it's often a reflection of our own insecurities or unmet needs. So the critical mother-in-law who can't stop commenting on your parenting choices, she may be acting out of fear, not malice.
That doesn't make the behavior okay, but it does change how you might approach it.
Exactly. Understanding the why behind the behavior gives you more options for how to respond. If you know she's acting from insecurity, you can address the insecurity rather than just fighting the behavior. That's a fundamentally different and often more effective strategy.
Okay, I want to come back to something you said earlier about the structural ambiguity of in-law relationships, because I think that's actually the most underrated part of this whole conversation.
It really is. The Greif and Woolley research from the journal Social Work Review found that boundary ambiguity was one of the strongest predictors of poor relationship quality between daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law. More than family triangles, more than demographics. The ambiguity itself, not knowing what role you're supposed to play, not knowing what's expected, that's what creates the friction.
So part of the solution is just clarifying the roles, making the implicit explicit?
That's a big part of it. When expectations are unclear, everyone fills in the blanks with their own assumptions. And those assumptions are shaped by culture, by family of origin, by what they saw growing up. TechBuzzer points out that communication style clashes are a huge driver of in-law conflict. One family values directness, another values subtlety, and neither realizes the other is operating from a completely different playbook.
And neither one thinks they're the problem.
Right. Which is why the anthropologist's mindset is so useful. It helps you step back and see the communication style as a cultural artifact rather than a personal attack. She's not being passive-aggressive because she hates you. She's being passive-aggressive because that's how conflict was handled in her family for generations.
That's actually kind of a relief in a weird way. Like, it's not about you specifically.
Often it's not, though sometimes it is. And that's where you have to be honest with yourself about which situation you're actually in. Is this a pattern of behavior that damages your well-being over time? Or is it a handful of isolated moments you can shrug off? That distinction from NeuroLaunch is the real diagnostic question.
Pattern versus isolated incident. That's the line.
That's the line. And it's worth sitting with, honestly, because the answer changes everything about how you respond.
So when you step back from everything we've covered today, the evolutionary roots, the psychological drivers, the structural ambiguity, the loyalty traps, what does this all really come down to?
It comes down to this. The monster-in-law isn't always a monster. Sometimes she's a scared woman losing her grip on a role that defined her. Sometimes she's someone whose communication style is just wildly incompatible with yours. And sometimes, genuinely, sometimes she is causing real harm, and that needs to be named and addressed. The work is figuring out which one you're dealing with.
And the tools are different depending on the answer.
Completely different. If it's a communication mismatch, the anthropologist's mindset and some explicit expectation setting can go a long way. If it's a genuine pattern of control and manipulation, you need consistent boundaries, a united front with your partner, and probably professional support. And in both cases, the most important thing you can do for your relationship is validate your partner's experience instead of explaining it away.
That's not what she meant, Dance. I think that's the thing that's going to stick with me from this conversation, because it's so well-intentioned and so damaging at the same time.
It really captures the whole dilemma. You love both people, you want harmony, so you minimize the hurt to preserve the peace. But the peace you're preserving is hollow, and the hurt you're minimizing is real. And eventually, the person absorbing all of that quietly stops being quiet.
Anna Pasternak said she told herself that love would conquer the differences between her and her mother-in-law, and it didn't. But I think what the research is saying is that love alone was never going to be enough. You also need clarity, consistency, and the courage to actually name what's happening.
That's exactly right. Love is the reason you're in the room, but it's not a strategy. Clarity is a strategy. Boundaries are a strategy. A united front is a strategy. Love just means you're motivated to do the work.
Here's what I want to leave people with. If you're in the middle of this right now, if you're dreading the next family gathering, if you're doing that's not what she meant dance, if you're absorbing behavior that doesn't feel okay, the first step isn't a confrontation. It's an honest conversation with your partner about what you're both actually experiencing. Because the in-law relationship is hard, but the couple relationship is the one worth protecting. And if you're the one caught in the middle, if you're the son or daughter watching your partner and your parent clash, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to manage everyone's feelings and start actually listening to your partners. That's not betraying your family. That's building one. That's a really good place to land. And honestly, it reframes the whole monster-in-law narrative, because the real story was never just about her. It was always about the relationship at the center of it all.
And that relationship is worth fighting for, just maybe not in the way most people think.
Anna Pasternak said she convinced herself that she and her mother-in-law had one crucial thing in common. They both loved the same man. Turns out that was the problem and the solution all along.